Hi friends, I hope you're having a great day so far. We have been learning and reading about the weather. We have read 3 or 4 actually different books about the weather so far. We read The Wind Blew. We read Whatever the Weather. We read What Will the Weather Be Like Today? And we read Who Cares About the Weather? All of those have been awesome books. But I want to read a book to you today that is a fiction book. It's a fiction book, and it's about something that is not real or something that is pretend. And it's called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And you might have seen the movie that came from this book. The author is Judy Barrett, and the illustrator is Ron Barrett. So this is a book about the weather, but it's a silly book about the weather, and it's a silly book about a pretend town called Chew and Swallow, where they have all kinds of crazy weather. Let's find out what happens. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning. Pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for the juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we could each eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed towards the kitchen ceiling, and landed right on Henry. What landed on him? After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he'd ever told. Do you know what a tall tale is? A tall tale is a story that's make-believe, or if it might be exaggerated, or someone made up parts of the story. So Grandpa is telling a tall tale, or a pretend story. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town called Chew and Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses and trees, and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was the weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. What do you think this guy's doing out here? He's checking the weather. But is he looking for rain? Let's find out. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained rain. It never snowed snow. And it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas. And sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. What do these kind of look like floating over the town? It kind of looks like clouds to me, but made out of hamburgers. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their glasses, plates, cups, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way, they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry between meals. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. Then the wind shifted from the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off their meal. What do you notice about the ceiling at the restaurant? It looks like they don't have a ceiling. Why? They have to let all the food fly into the restaurant because that's where they get their food, from the sky, from the weather. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming very heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes followed by gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had rather an unusual job. For a sanitation department, it had to remove the food that fell on the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned up everything after the meal and fed all the dogs and cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back in the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worst. Spaghetti ties up town. One day, there were nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day long. The next day, there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day, there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Another day, there was a pea soup fog, and no one could see where they were going. They could barely find the rest of the meal. They got stuck in the fog. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread rolls all day long into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds, some without. There was white bread and rye bread and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen bread rolls before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds picked at it a bit, but it just stayed until it got staler and staler. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. Close the school because of a giant pancake? Lunch one day brought 15-inch strips of ice cream, cheese, and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind, accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. The sanitation department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there were no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. The people glued together giant pieces of stale bread, sandwich style, with peanut butter, took absolute necessities with them, and set sail on the rafts for a new land. If they go to a new place, where do you think they'll get their food? After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town, which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well, enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had to make was getting used to buying food at a supermarket. They found it odd that food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes and cans and bottles. Meat had to be cooked or was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except for rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his kiss goodnight. The next morning we woke up to see snow falling outside of our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it, a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even when we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell the mashed potatoes. The end. So, did that seem like something that could really, truly happen? No. So that is a story called fiction story. That means it is about something pretend. Their grandpa told them a story about a pretend town that had food falling from the sky. I hope you enjoyed the story today, friends. Thanks for joining me.